Welcome to the Culturite. I'm Mucyo Balinda, your host, and today we're diving into the art of political spin, more specifically the calculated rebranding of Donald Trump's actions and controversies by his ally. In the latest of these narrative gymnastics, we saw JD Vance step forward to defend Trump with a level of verbal finesse that can only be described as impressive if we ignore the glaring contradictions. Vance, like many of Trump's defenders, tried to turn glaring weaknesses into hidden strengths, painting Trump as the ultimate underdog battling against a hostile establishment. But the real question here is, do they truly believe that the American public is this gullible? Are we meant to look past the evidence, the critics from within his own administration, and the justice system's clear standards, and simply swallow this story of victimhood and persecution? Take a look at what he said.
Thank you. Let me ask you, obviously, Trump's former Chief of Staff, General John Kelly, was alarmed, he says, by what he heard when Trump said he wanted to use the National Guard or the Pentagon to go after the enemy within, Americans with whom he disagrees, including the Pelosi's, Adam Schiff. And then he gave an interview. He said that Trump, quote, certainly falls into the general definition of fascist, that he is, quote, certainly an authoritarian, admires people who are dictators. You've called him a disgruntled former employee, but why shouldn't Americans out there listen to somebody who worked closely with Trump, worked with him longer than you've worked with him, retired 4-star Marine general, served his country honorably, who is conservative, who says he agrees with Trump on most policies, but is worried about this aspect of Trump?
So let me just say two things in response. So first of all, a lot of what John Kelly, pretty much all of what John Kelly accuses Donald Trump of saying, there were other people in the room, Mike Pence's former chief of staff, for example, who've explicitly said Donald Trump never said those things. So that's number one. Number two, I actually think that there's an interesting conversation here to have, Jake, which is why does John Kelly not support Donald Trump? It's about policy. It's actually not about personality.
He says he agrees with Trump on most policy. He disagrees with Trump on how Trump views his role and the fascism and the authoritarianism.
I don't buy that, Jake, because if you actually look at John Kelly, at folks like Liz Cheney, the fundamental disagreement they have with Donald Trump is even though they say that they're conservative in the sense that they want America to get involved in a ton of ridiculous military conflicts, they want America to police the world, and Donald Trump wasn't.
John Kelly lost a son in Afghanistan.
And I honor his son's sacrifice, and I honor his family's sacrifice. That doesn't mean he's not wrong about policy.
What specifically are you talking about? What is he saying?
Let's peel back the layers of this rhetorical sleight of hand and examine the broader implication of selective loyalty and victimhood narratives in today's political landscape. In the complex world of political image crafting, the Trump campaign strategy to paint former senior administration officials, once considered the best people, as disgruntled figures, is both fascinating and revealing. When you have a lineup of high-ranking officials, from vice president to foreign affairs secretaries and defense secretary, stepping forward with concern or criticism, it invites an obvious question. If they are unqualified or ineffective, what does it say about the person who hired them? This tactic of reframing dissent as incompetence or personal grievance might work in a world of reality TV, where the central figure dictates the narrative. However, in governance, such dismissals aren't convincing. When a president chooses figures like Bill Barr, Mike Pence, General Kelly, etc., it's generally because their backgrounds, experience, and reputations signal stability and competence. When a long list of these figures later criticize the president or outline concerns, dismissing them as failures suggests a disregard for the intelligence and perspective they brought to their roles. This reframing reflects a broader trend in political discourse, turning perceived weaknesses into strengths by redirecting blame. But the spin has its limits. Americans can see the inconsistency. The person who once celebrated these officials now wants the public to believe they are almost universally unfit. This tactic is more than a simple PR maneuver. It's a cultural commentary on how campaigns often assume people don't have the critical thinking skills to spot a contradiction. This isn't a game of clever rhetoric anymore. It's a reflection of the broader belief that the public is willing to accept easy answers over deeper truths. When we're told that everyone who lives is either disgruntled or failed, it's an insult to our collective intelligence. It suggests we are willing to overlook the consistency in this criticism and instead accept the idea that it's not the president's judgment that's flawed, but everyone else's character. The irony here is palpable. If these officials were in fact poor hires, it reflects poorly on Trump's claim that he would bring in the best people to reform Washington. The string of criticism, like a thread, traces back to the center, Donald Trump himself. The lesson for American voters is to consider whether to buy into this narrative or recognize them for what they are, red lipstick on a pig. It's a choice between taking the spin at face value or seeing the broader cultural issue, a deep underestimation of our ability to understand, remember, and question. They are spinning the same narrative regarding our justice system. This is a textbook example of selectively applied victimhood, a strategy that's as revealing as it is deliberate. In their view, every legal inquiry, every charge, every indictment aimed at Trump is immediately framed as illegitimate, a witch hunt, or a deep state conspiracy. The pattern suggests a view of the world that places Donald Trump at its center. Any system that questions or holds him accountable must be inherently corrupt, while anything in his favor is seen as the standard of fairness and justice. This worldview goes beyond personal defense. It reveals a troubling approach to justice. Trump and his supporters craft an image of a justice system that is fair only when it operates on their terms. When it acts independently, they denounce it as broken or biased. This messaging speaks to a broader cultural trend of selective victimhood, where accountability is rebranded as persecution and criticism is reimagined as oppression. But let's examine this oppression. What is Trump actually accused of? Misuse of power, alleged interference in election processes, and disregard for legal constraints. The same standards anyone in his position would be held to. The truth, though, is left unaddressed, and the campaign sidesteps specifics in favor of broad-stroke victimhood narratives. Trump's narrative implies he's targeted not because of his actions, but because he fights for the people against a system supposedly rigged against him. Yet, this overlooks a key detail. These critics are not a collective deep state banding together. They are individuals who, of their own accord, have shared similar observations about Trump. Each one, whether Mike Pence, Bill Barr, or Mark Esper, speaks from their own unique vantage point. They weren't coerced into these positions. They arrived at them through their direct experiences with Trump. To believe that every one of these officials is conspiring against him would be absurd, especially given that they once worked at the very heart of his administration. This kind of manipulation of victimhood challenges the public's sense of reality. The message is clear. Believe in Trump, the victim, or question the legitimacy of every institution that seeks accountability. And that's the underlying cultural message. Anything critical is corrupt. Anything challenging him is a betrayal. It's an insult to our intelligence, assuming we can't recognize the obvious paradox. Just as we're asked to disregard his critics, we are asked to ignore the real substance behind their criticisms. The cultural takeaway? The justice system, like any institution, is only respected insofar as it aligns with its personal narrative. This isn't just about one man. It reflects a broader shift in how leaders use selective loyalty to erode trust in public institutions. When everything is painted as biased or a witch hunt, simply because it doesn't cater to one's personal worldview, the ultimate cost is our faith in objective truth and justice.